In this last segment, we're finally ready to wrap up our discussion of contract defenses to formation and enforcement with a discussion of duress, undue influence, illegality, and unconscionability. And the good news about these last defenses we're going to cover before we move on to the statute of frauds is all of these defenses, right, these last four we're going to go over are fairly straightforward, right? There's not too many curveballs I think you're going to encounter on a contract law fact pattern that's going to make any of these very confusing. So hopefully we can breeze through these without too many issues, and we'll be ready to wrap up defenses and move on to our next big meaty topic, which of course is going to be the statute of frauds. But let's wrap these up, make sure we cross our T's and dot our I's, right? So first, let's start with our discussion of duress, right? With duress, we're thinking about improper threats that leave the adversely affected party no reasonable alternative but to succumb. So the most obvious form of duress is physical duress, the classic gun to your head scenario, right? And any time you see a fact pattern where someone's using physical compulsion, something like holding a gun to someone's head, right? That's physical duress. That contract is void, null. Court treats it like it never existed. Now that's rarely tested because it's so easy to see, right? If someone's actually holding a gun to someone's head or truly using physical compulsion, that's void, right? That's physical duress and it's a complete nullity. The court's going to treat that contract as though it never existed. Again, 100% void. But more so what we're talking about on contract law fact patterns isn't physical duress, it's the type of extortion or economic duress. So our full rule statement here, to be clear, is that a contract is voidable by the adversely affected party if the adversely affected party's assent is induced by an improper threat that leaves the adversely affected party with no reasonable alternative but to succumb to the threat, right? So the key words you want to look for on a fact pattern, and what I always tell students, is anytime you see words like sign this or X, Y, and Z consequence is going to happen, or agree to this now, or X, Y, and Z is going to happen to you, right? Anytime you see the sign this or else fact pattern, you should immediately be thinking duress, right? That's what an improper threat is usually going to look like. Sign this or blank, agree to this or blank, right? And so fortunately, the Second Restatement gives us some threats that are categorically considered improper. So if you see any of these, right, any of the four up here on the board, you know, okay, that's an improper threat. So any threat of a crime or a tort, right, that's going to be an improper threat. Sign this, or I am going to defame your name in the community. Sign this, or I'm going to slander you. Sign this, or I am going to hack into your computer and read your emails and distribute them, right? You know, all of that. If you're threatening an actual crime or a tort, that's an improper threat, right, for duress purposes. If you're threatening criminal prosecution, sign this or I'm going to report you to the police for committing this crime, right? A threat of criminal prosecution is improper. Bad faith civil action threats, right? So if you're threatening in bad faith to pursue civil action against someone, that is also going to be considered an improper threat. Now, the operative words here are bad faith. If you in good faith believe you have a real civil case to present against somebody, then you can threaten that all day long. So one of the classics you see here is somebody threatening to sue someone for sexual harassment, right? Sign this, agree to this, raise my salary, or I will sue you for sexual harassment. Well, if the person threatening the sexual harassment suit in honest good faith believes that they truly have a sexual harassment claim, then that's fine, right? That's not an improper threat. But if no sexual harassment was ever committed and they're just inventing this, right, that's a bad faith threat of civil action. That is going to be considered improper, right? So criminal prosecutions, we don't care if it's in good faith or bad faith. If you're threatening to call the cops and report somebody for a crime, right, that's automatically an improper threat. But if you're threatening a civil action, you have to ask, is this being done in good faith or bad faith? Does this person honestly believe that they have a claim here, or is this completely frivolous, right? If it's frivolous, it's totally in bad faith, then of course that's an improper threat. The final category that the Second Restatement gives us is if you're threatening to breach the implied duty of good faith and fair dealing, right? All contracts, and we'll talk about this more when we get to performance, but all contracts that you enter into, when you enter into a contract with somebody else, there's an implied duty on each side to act fairly and honestly and in good faith to uphold your obligations under the contract, right? That you're not going to do anything to undermine the contract, any type of shady tactics to undermine your obligations or reduce the benefits of the other side's contract, and usually, good faith, behaving honestly, fairly, and in good faith is pretty easy to understand and see. I always say, good faith and bad faith when you see it most of the time. So threatening to breach the implied duty of good faith and fair dealing is also going to be considered improper, which is a good segue into this idea of economic duress, right? One note to make on duress is this idea of economic duress. So just because one party to the bargaining process is very cash positive and the other side is very cash flow negative, right? That doesn't mean we have duress happening. Highly levered situations doesn't equate to duress or undue influence automatically, right? That's kind of the nature of living in America and capitalism, right? We encourage that to a large degree, to use your economic stance or your economic power to your advantage to further your wealth. That's fine. All of that's fine and great. That's not duress or undue influence, right? Just remember, if you're actually going to say something is economic duress, we still need that level of an improper threat that's really leaving the party no reasonable alternative but to succumb. We still need that wrongful action, the improper threat. So in an economic situation where you see this discrepancy in bargaining power, one side maybe looks more wealthy and the other side looks more desperate for cash, right? Where that's actually going to rise to the level of duress. Usually you see this in a term of breaching the implied duty of good faith and fair dealing, where the parties already have a pre-existing contract. So say you have a creditor, right, who's lending money to a business, right, through a line of credit. And this business is relying on that line of credit to survive. They need this money coming in every month to meet payroll, right, to live, to survive as a business. They have to have this money coming in. Well, if the creditor knows this and is like, well, without this money we're lending them, this business is going to die, we have them at their will, right? We can do anything we want. So if the creditor then goes to them and says, hey, look, we're going to stop giving you money. We're going to breach, the duties we owe here, right? We're going to stop this monthly line of credit that we're giving you unless you pay us a higher interest rate or unless you agree to XYZ, whatever it is, right? Well, that might now rise. Now we have an actual improper threat. That's the type of economic duress that we might say, okay, right? Where you're actually using that pre-existing duty, right? You're using the threat rather to take something away that they need to survive, right? You're still threatening something. And that's more in the economic context where you're going to see that, where you're actually threatening usually to take away something that's a critical aspect to the business's survival, right? Like a creditor lending money that the business is relying on and then threatening to take that line of credit away, right? The business now has no reasonable alternative, right? If they don't succumb to this threat and that line of credit disappears, they're going under, they're going out of business. So they have no alternative but to succumb, right? In that case, that might rise to the level of economic duress, where we do see an improper threat or that actual wrongful conduct where we're having a breach of that implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing between the parties to act, fairly and honestly to uphold your obligations, right? If that's happening, that's what you want to look out for. But just because the mere fact that we have parties in different economic positions alone is not enough, right? We actually still need to make sure that the requirements are met. So sometimes I do see students get a little tripped up by that. If a party is desperate for cash, right, and they're negotiating with someone who has a lot of cash, right, that is a factor in the analysis, but that's not determinative of anything, right? That's, again, pretty much encouraged in the United States, right? Welcome to capitalism. But that's pretty much it for duress, right? Again, the main things you want to look out for are the categorically considered improper threats under the Second Restatement. These types, threats of a crime, threats of a tort, threats of a criminal prosecution, threats of bad faith civil actions, or threats to breach the implied duty of good faith and fair dealing. All of that, improper threats, right? That's going to constitute duress if we're leaving the adversely affected party no reasonable alternative but to succumb, right? Then we have duress. Undue influence is similar, but a little bit different, right? So undue, we can just go through the rule statement, right? So a contract under undue influence is voidable by the adversely affected party if the adversely affected party's assent is induced due to his susceptibility to pressure and the other party's application of excessive pressure, right? So undue influence is all about high pressure negotiations, right? And I usually like to draw a chart for students to map this out. So imagine we have a simple chart like this, and say this y-axis represents the susceptibility of the adversely affected party, right? If the y-axis is how susceptible our adversely affected party is, and the higher you go on the y-axis, the more susceptible or weakened this party is. And let's say that the x-axis represents the amount of application of pressure. And the farther we go along the x-axis, the more pressure that is being applied. Well, then undue influence on this chart, where is it going to fall? Up in this quadrant, right? Up in the upper right, where we have high susceptibility and a lot of pressure being applied. So way up here, right, that's very high undue influence, but anything up in this section, if we were plotting a point for our fact pattern, anything in that upper right quadrant is going to be undue influence. So you really do kind of want to analyze undue influence in terms of this graph, right? Where we say, we're just asking how susceptible is this adversely affected party to pressure, right? And how much pressure is actually being applied. If it's a lot of pressure and we have a very susceptible party, probably going to be undue influence. So, what's going to make a party susceptible to pressure? This could be a lot of things, right? Anything that's going to weaken somebody's willpower. So it could be someone who's just elderly or younger, right? It could just be characteristics, right? We have an older person or someone who has some sort of mental illness that makes them more incompetent, right? If you see any characteristic that might make someone more susceptible to coercion or pressure, right? And it doesn't even have to be physical characteristics. It could be conditions, right? Someone's in the hospital recovering from surgery and they're in a weakened state. Anything like that, right? And that's all physical and mental conditions that someone can be in. But also, like we talked about before, it could be differences in bargaining power, right? The more desperate somebody is, right? Like I said, that can be a factor in the analysis. So if someone's very desperate, and then you add on top of that some characteristics, they're very tired, desperate, stress, anxiety, whatever, panicking, all of that stuff, anything in the fact pattern that could make somebody more susceptible, right, to having their will overborne by pressure right, you would want to analyze in your discussion, right? So again, undue influence and duress, very fact-specific analyses. You always want to use the facts that you're given. But step one, you would look for anything that would identify that this party would be more susceptible to pressure than an ordinary person in the situation, right? So number one, you got to determine susceptibility, and then you want to look at how much pressure is actually being applied, right? What tactics are being used and how are they being used? And a good example of this, and a good case I like to give as a recommendation here, is Odorizzi v. Bloomfield School District, right? This is a famous contracts case for undue influence. Thank you so much for watching this video preview of our Legal Education Accelerator Program, or LEAP for short. If you would like to see the conclusion of this video and gain full access to our entire 1L and 2L video library, integrated outlines, streamable audio versions, additional practice exams with explanations, and much more, we invite you to head over to our website and join the thousands of law students who have already enrolled. To get started with your no-risk free trial today, simply click the link in the description box below or visit www.studicata.com/leap.
Hi everyone, my name is Serena and I'm currently a law student at South Texas College of Law, Houston.
Hi everybody, my name is Shiva and I'm currently a law student at Southwestern.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle and I am a first year student at South Texas College of Law, Houston. I used the Studicata study video series last semester to help me prepare mostly for contracts, and I actually made an A+ in contracts last semester, which I greatly dedicate to the Studicata videos.
By using Studicata to help me prepare for my final exam, I was able to score the highest grade out of my class on the final and even have my essay distributed as the model answer. Not to mention I had done quite poorly on the midterm and was struggling throughout the whole course of the semester, understanding the material and keeping up with lectures.
Because of the Studicata video lectures, I was able to go into my exams with a feeling of confidence. I didn't have to worry about what the rules of law were or how I was going to organize my answer to an essay question.
I would absolutely recommend the Studicata series and their online course materials to anyone. I think that they are not like professor lectures that you might find online or other outside study materials that you may encounter. I think that the Studicata videos really focus on not only ensuring that you understand the material that you're going to encounter on your final, but they also help you to understand kind of the best method for test taking, and they really break down how to approach each problem and the best ways to tackle certain methods on testing, and I think that's really important, and I think it's really special. I don't see that anywhere else in any of the other online resources that I've found. So I would certainly recommend Studicata to anyone who is studying in law school right now. Good luck on your studying, and you're going to do great.
I would definitely recommend Studicata to anybody watching this video. Give it a chance. I'm positive that you will love it, that you will get a lot out of it, and that you will be happy that you gave it a chance. I definitely am. I know I will be using Studicata in the future.
And I cannot thank Studicata enough for getting me through my first semester of law school. I will definitely continue to watch the Studicata video lectures throughout my law school career, and I highly recommend that any future or current law student do the same.